Welcome. Hi, I'm Mikki, and this is Mikkipedia, where I sit down and chat to doctors, professors, athletes, practitioners, and experts in their fields related to health, nutrition, fitness, and well-being. And I'm delighted that you're here. Morena, everyone. Hope you're having a great week. And this week, I'm super excited to bring to you the conversation that I had with Professor Herman Pontzer. Now, Herman is the author of a book that's really exploded into the public sphere, Burn, The Misunderstood Science of Metabolism. And we do a super deep dive into how our understanding of energy expenditure has shifted and what this means with regards to fat loss, population obesity rates, the importance of physical activity versus diet, and a whole host of other metabolism-related issues. Herman Pontzer is an associate professor of evolutionary anthropology at Duke University, and he's the Associate Research Professor of Global Health at the Duke Global Health Institute. He's an internationally recognized researcher in human energetics and evolution. He has over 2 decades of research in field and laboratory and has conducted path-breaking studies across a range of settings, including fieldwork with the Hadza hunter-gatherers, of which we talk about, in northern Tanzania, fieldwork on chimpanzee ecology in the rainforests of Uganda, and metabolic measurements of great apes in zoos and sanctuaries around the globe. In addition to that, he's also been involved in a number of projects that look at how we as humans in this modern day society expend energy, and we talk about a paper that was just very recently published in and around how our metabolism changes over time, and it isn't what you think. So you can find information about Herman over on the Duke University website, and I'll absolutely put his contact details in the show notes as well. And just before we kick off with the interview, just to remind you, for those of you who have reached out to ask about supporting the podcast, the best way to do that is head to my website and hook into the recipe portal access there, where you get, for less than a coffee a week, you get access to all of my recipes, our private Facebook group where you get to ask me any questions, and we have weekly forums and fortnightly lives and things like that, and also the online messaging system where we can help personalize your already awesome nutrition approach. So, without further delay, please enjoy my interview with Herman Pontzer. Oh, you are such a talented writer, and you don't often find that with academics. Maybe it's just the academics that I read, but usually I expect to read a book like Burn, which is, well, actually the title did suggest that potentially there was going to be, that it was going to be like quite a
Let me ask you this: which subtitle did you get? Do you get The Misunderstood Science of Human Metabolism, or did you get New Science Blows the Lid Off of blah, blah, blah?
Oh, no, I got the other one, the New Science of the first one that you said. Say that
The
again.
Misunderstood Science of Human Metabolism or something, with the robots.
Yes.
The robots on the cover.
Do you know what, Herman? I cannot remember because it's a Kindle.
Doesn't matter, yeah. See, the UK version, the UK publisher did what I would have done, what I wanted people to do, which is just treat this like a science book and not like a diet book, because it isn't a diet book. And the US publisher wanted to make it they wanted to be in the diet space. They understood what it was. They weren't trying to make it something that wasn't, but they were very happy to try to put it into that space, which on one level is cool because maybe people who read it who wouldn't have. But on another level, it's a bit like, well, you feel like you showed up to the wrong party. But,
That's a very good point, because nothing about it really spoke to me as if it was a diet book, I loved the title, The Misunderstood Science of Metabolism. Having said that, though, with a Kindle, you know what it's like. You buy the book, and then suddenly you just get amnesia. It's like, I can't even remember what I'm reading. But, of course, I could remember with your book because I was doing it a prep for this. So, Herman, can we kick off by getting you to tell me, how did you even get into the field of human metabolism? I'd really love to understand your background a little bit first, and then get into the nuts and bolts?
Sure. So I'm an anthropologist, and specifically, I'm an evolutionary anthropologist, which is to say I'm very interested in how the human body evolved and how that sort of evolutionary history, the way our bodies were shaped, affects the way that they work today, especially in these strange environments we've built ourselves, these zoos that we live in. So, if you want to understand evolution and sort of the basic physiology of any organism, there's nothing you could start with that would be better than calories, right? Because, and the reason is in evolution, right? Life is a game of turning energy into offspring. That's full stop. That's it. Right. So, and not only that, but the amount of energy that you burn every day is telling you about all of your body's systems at work. Right. So it's telling you what's going on. It's sort of the bottom line number for how busy your different systems are. And so, and those differ between species. We now know. If we didn't before, we know it now for sure. So there are all kinds of interesting evolutionary questions, basic physiology questions, sort of, adaptations to different lifestyle sorts of questions that you can ask through the lens of metabolism. And that's what I've been doing for the past more than a decade, I guess.
And, your book, The Misunderstood Science of Metabolism, I feel like that so encaptures how people might feel about the entire area, like we use the term metabolism in so many different sort of contexts, yet you're studying it as a science. Can you just explain to us how you view, what is metabolism?
Yeah, that's a good place to start. So our cells do work every day, all day, throughout the day. You got 37 trillion of them. And, there's no system that can do work without burning energy. So, the engine in your car or the air conditioning unit in your house or whatever it is, if it's doing work, it's burning energy. And so it's the same with your cells. And so they're busy all day, all 37 trillion of your cells. And the work that they're doing, taking nutrients in, making different molecules, pumping out waste, pumping out signaling molecules like hormones, whatever it is, that takes energy. And so the energy that the sum of all the energy that all your cells burn every day, we call that total energy expenditure, or you can call it your metabolism if you like. And that, that is metabolism. The energy that you're burning to do that work is your metabolism. So for somebody like me, metabolism is all of that. It's all the physiology of it all at the same, all at once. And I think, you raise a really important point, which is that it's misunderstood. It's talked about in sort of kind of casual ways, I think, sometimes misleading ways, because people talk about metabolism like it's just about your diet or it's just about your exercise. And those things are all related, of course, and they all affect your metabolism, but they're not your metabolism.
And in your book, you sort of describe we've got calories in and we've got calories out. And there's, if I'm going to, say, the supermarket and I pick up any kind of food item that has a nutrition information panel on it, it'll give me the number of calories in the food. And then it'll give me this percentage of how much total energy that might contribute to my overall energy requirements, which is based on this 2,000 calories a day. Like, does everyone actually need 2,000 calories? Do we only need 2,000 calories? How is that sort of contributed to our misunderstanding?
I think it just speaks to how little people understand. And it's not their fault. I want to be really clear about that. We're just not taught about it very well. That 2,000 kilocalorie a day benchmark that everybody knows is that is based on asking people what they ate. And people, I think it's, at least it's happened in the US, it might have been in other countries as well, but the government was interested in putting out, dietary guidelines. And so they thought, well, what should the guidelines be? What should they be based on? How many calories do people usually eat? And they didn't have any good measurements of it. And so they did what makes, sort of sense, which is they just asked people, thousands of them, what they ate. And, that's fine, except that you're depending on people to be honest and remember. And, it turns out that, like most systems that are based on humans being smart about themselves, it didn't work really well because, I think people reported burning about 2,200 calories a day, kilocalories, I should be careful. And they didn't want to round up and they thought 2,200 was a kind of a odd number. So they rounded down to 2,000. Right. So they took a bad number because we know when you ask people what they eat, they don't get it right.
Yeah.
And then, so that's a bad number anyway. And then they rounded down, which is even worse. So the number of calories, kilocalories that you actually eat a day and burn a day, because most of us are pretty weight stable, is about 2,400 kilocalories a day for women and closer to 3,000 kilocalories a day for men. And that's that difference is based just on body size and how much sort of lean mass you carry. Lean mass burns more calories than fat does.
Yeah. Okay. And what are the energy sucking sort of parts of our body? Like, where is all that energy being spent? Like, we've got these 37 trillion cells.
Right.
What's greedy?
Yeah. So most of your energy all day, even if you're an active person who likes to exercise a lot, most of your energy is spent on sort of the background stuff that you'll never notice. So your brain runs a 5K every day, right? Your brain burns 300 kilocalories of energy per day, and that's equivalent to a 5K. And that's whether or not you're thinking a lot. You know, if you sort of zone out, doesn't matter. It's that your brain's doing that all the time. Your liver is equally hungry for calories. Kidneys, surprisingly hungry for calories. Your heart is constantly going. Digestion takes about 10% of the calories you eat go to digest those calories, that food. So, tons and tons and tons of energy all day. And we haven't even gotten into, that's sort of like when you're at rest, not asleep, but lying on your bed, totally chilled out. If you are in the real world and you're getting stressed out, or you're getting cold and you're keeping yourself warm, there's a million other ways that you can spend energy that you don't even really know you're spending. The energy you spend sort of walking and running and exercising is only a portion of the energy you spend all day.
So it's so interesting talking about energy expenditure because, as I understand it, because it is an expensive thing to study, it hasn't, this is one of the reasons why there is a lot of misconception around it, because potentially people have just sort of hypothesized in and around how much energy you burn when you go for a run or go to the gym. So do you read magazines or hear things see things on social and just go, my goodness, that is so incorrect?
Yeah, of course. I mean, here's some red flags for you. Anytime you see something that is it boosts your metabolism, things are inevitably bullshit. I mean, I'm sorry. They're all wrong. I mean, unless it's like an illicit drug that you shouldn't be taking anyway. I mean, there are some things, but I saw, metabolism boosting water and metabolism boosting, vegetables, and you should eat your vegetables anyhow, but they're not going to do anything to your metabolism. Come on. It's all of this stuff is just ridiculous.
And I did see yesterday, in fact, that you've just recently published a paper looking at the change in metabolism across a lifetime, or energy expenditure across a lifetime. Do you want to sort of briefly describe what happens in different life stages?
Yeah, absolutely. So this was a big study that came together because a dozen or more labs internationally all pitched in, and my lab was one of them, and we all pitched in our data. And there's a technique that you use to measure total calories burned over the course of a day. And it's called the doubly labeled water technique. It's this isotope tracking technique, and it's quite expensive. It's about $1,000 per person. It's cheaper now, but as a rough estimate. And so, nobody had really big data sets because it's so darn expensive to do. But all the labs all together did. And so we all put our data together, and we had 6,421, I think, if I'm remembering that number correctly, people's measurements from 8 days old up to their 90s. And we were able to really pull apart exactly what the contributors are to energy expenditure, to total calories burned per day over the life course. Okay, so first we were able to show, and we knew this going in, but we were able to show really nicely how body size affects expenditure, right? So it goes up. Small people burn less energy than big people. We knew that going in, but we were able to show that to be very clear and very precise about what that relationship really is. And then we were able to say, okay, for your body size, do you have a fast metabolism or a slow metabolism, right?
So there is actually a fast and a slow metabolism,
Yeah, and some of that's just noise, just differences between people that we don't have a great handle on it. But some of it is very much patterned, and it's patterned by what age you are in your life. And so we noticed, for example, that after you correct for body size, infants about 1 year old have metabolic rates. They're burning energy 50% faster than an adult would if they were an adult that size. And then slowly that elevated metabolism kind of comes down into adult levels by about age 20.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's just completely study age 20 to age 60. And so all of the things that happen in your middle age where you feel like your metabolism is slowing down, turns out that's not really true. Those changes are happening for other reasons. It's not metabolism.
Yeah.
And then post 60, your metabolism declines. And it's not just because people over 60 tend to lose muscle mass. We've known that for a long time. And that'll contribute to this. But even considering that, even controlling for that, you're losing, your metabolism is going down. Your cells are getting less busy. So that was really fun.
Yeah. And if I think about that, with regards to the older age group, we know that enzyme activity diminishes and things like that over time. Yeah. Is that potentially reflected in some of your findings?
Well, that's exactly right. No, that's exactly it. It's sort of how busy are the cells producing enzymes or the enzyme cycles that break things down and build them back up. Yeah, all that stuff is happening slower. And if it happens more slowly, then it'll consume energy more slowly. And on the whole, you as a whole unit of this stuff happening, it all come down. So that's the way to think about metabolism, right? Is how busy are my cells and how many do I have?
Yeah, true. And I suppose your brain might be shrinking. Maybe
that's possible. Although we would control that, our analyses would control for that as well, because we control for all lean mass, fat-free mass, I should say, versus fat mass, and so we control for that. But you're right that to the extent that happens, and it's gray matter, not white matter, which seems to be that can contribute for sure. Yeah.
So Herman, I've always understood that post 35, it's all downhill. We're in our twilight years, and we're just really waiting it out until the inevitable happens. But with regards to our metabolism, it is, I've heard that it is ticking down or decade on decade. But are you saying that might be happening, but it's not our metabolism, it's muscle loss or bone density loss, that kind of thing that is contributing?
So a few things are happening. One is, if you're not active, then you might lose fat, you might lose muscle mass. And if that's happening, then total expenditure is going to go down. We're not talking about that in this analysis because we're talking about after you control for lean mass, right? Taking the body size changes out of it. Okay. But that's true that your experience will be that your metabolism is going down if you lose fat-free mass.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But beyond that, there's nothing happening in terms of calories. Your cells are just as busy at 40 and 50 as they were at 20 and 30. And so what must be happening, right? I'm 44. I know for a fact that when I hit 30, I felt like my body was changing. When I hit 40, I felt like it was changing again. And I'm an active person. I try to exercise. I try to eat healthy. And I still felt this very much. And it can't be metabolism. Right. What's happening is, we know, for example, in Western cultures that are energy rich, you have high testosterone in your 20s. The highest is in your 20s or so. And then it slowly comes down. So perhaps I was experiencing that decline. Right. Women go through similar sort of lifetime changes in hormone profiles, especially at menopause, of course. So women often report changes in metabolism, what feels like a change in metabolism at menopause, but likely that's hormonal changes, obviously, but that they're changing the way you feel. And they could even change sort of how likely you are to put on fat versus lean muscle. That's interesting to think about. But anyway, it's not actually how many calories you burn. It's not how busy your cells are.
Yeah. So interesting. And of course, you mentioned we're referring to the Western population, and how you have developed your knowledge over time, of course, comes from your work with more traditional populations like the Hadza. Herman, I'm obviously completely ignorant, because I suppose one of the surprising things when I read about research like that is how on earth do traditional populations like this still exist in the world? How is that? How have they been relatively untouched?
It's harder and harder for them. And I think, untouched isn't quite the right way to think about it.
Okay.
So I don't know what the equivalent would be in New Zealand or obviously the Aboriginal groups. No, right. That's not what I mean. So the comparison I was going to make was to the Amish populations here in the States.
Okay.
So if you're familiar with them, these are people who cultures who moved to the States in, like the 1700s and have tried to keep that same farming culture ever since. Many of the, really traditional groups don't have electricity in their homes. They don't use motorized anything. It's all horse and buggy. And, but of course, around them zipping madly about is the rest of the world. Right. And there's billboards and there's radio. And they know about all that stuff. They're not they're not, they can see it all and hear it all. And they come across it, but they keep very much to their own way. And so the Hadza are a bit like that. I mean, it's not quite as developed around them, obviously, as it would be here in the States. But they know about the outside world. They know, and there's people who they come across regularly who are farmers, and so they understand all that. It's not like they're not like, trapped in amber, right? But they really are proud of their culture, and rightfully so. And they've been able to hold on to it. And what's great is that the Tanzanian government has given them the space to do that. That's something that we tragically screwed up here in the States and a lot of other places as well, is we did not give our indigenous groups that kind of space, and with horrible consequences. But luckily, there are a handful of places where they've been able to hold on, and the Hadza in Tanzania are one of them.
And it's amazing that you had the opportunity to go in and be able to study and observe and sit in and be part of that culture for like a period of time. So with your research, like, how long did you spend in the environment? And do you want to sort of talk to us a little bit about the Hadza? Like, what is their lifestyle like? Like, what? Yeah.
Yeah. So the Hadza, they're traditional hunter-gatherers. What does that mean? Well, they live in sort of open savanna in northern Tanzania. They live in grass houses, about 20 or so people to a camp. The camps are sort of spread around either anywhere from an hour's walk to maybe half a day's walk apart from each other. And they don't have any, by hunting and gathering, we're saying they don't have any domesticated crops or domesticated animals. No electricity, no machines, no plumbing, nothing like that. Men hunt with bow and arrow. And they also chop into trees to get there are lots of bee species there that make nests in old trees, in hollow trees, and they get a lot of honey from that. So the men get honey, and they hunt wild game with bow and arrow that they make. Women dig up wild tubers, or they collect berries or other plant foods to eat. And so it's all wild foods every day. And they've been doing that, for millennia. Who knows when they started exactly, but probably for thousands and thousands of years. And so when we want to study them, right, it's basically, it feels a bit like a complicated camping trip, right? Because you take all of your scientific kit, computers and any kinds of, biological sort of measurement stuff you want to take out, and it all has to fit in the back of a Land Rover. And I should say that you need to get all the government permits for all of this, because there's a lot of protections for very good reasons for these kind of groups. So we get all of the government permits for this. We go to the Hadza. I collaborate with a guy named Brian Wood. Brian Wood is a Hadza expert. He's probably spent more nights in a Hadza camp in the last 20 years than he spent in his home.
Wow.
Yeah, he's spent tons of time there. He speaks some Hadza. When we work with the Hadza, we communicate in Swahili, which they speak fluently. They're bilingual, because in that part of Africa, any other tribe that you might bump up against the shared language is Swahili, and then everybody has their own tribal language that they will have learned at home. So they're bilingual, and they are fluent in Swahili. Anyway, so you pack up the Land Rover with all your food and all your camping kit, as well as all your science kit. And then you go out, and, it depends on the kind of research you're doing, how long you might stay in a particular camp. The work I've done has had me in Hadza camps for, a couple months at a time, sometimes shorter. Sometimes you go camp to camp and spend a day or two in each camp, kind of doing quick assessments. Depends on the research. Brian has spent literally months and months in Hadza camps.
Pre-COVID, what was... when was the last time that you were in one of those camps? Oh,
yeah. COVID's been a mess, because we were going to go last summer, and we're going to go this summer and haven't been able to. It's fall 2019.
I thought a couple of things which were quite hilarious in your book. One was when you were, I believe it was your book that I read this in, or maybe it was another podcast, that one of your initial trips there, and someone had told you to go out and observe the activity of the Hadza when they were hunting, and you were like, walking. And you're like, this is all they're doing. They're just walking. Do I have to report this? And then whoever it was, and maybe it was Brian or another more experienced. Yeah, he was like, mate, yes, that's what they do.
Yeah, he was like, if you don't say anything, we assume they're walking. Yeah, that's right.
Exactly. Yeah. But like a couple of like super interesting things, or at least I thought was really interesting, was the cultural differences and how they interact with each other with regards to sharing all these like pleasantries that we have in our modern, that we think are polite yet completely unnecessary in their lifestyle.
I know, I love that too. It's so one thing you notice is that when somebody comes back to camp with food, there's no words exchanged. They just start kind of handing it to people. People come up to them with a handout and they just kind of share. And it's like kind of sharing snacks at school kind of thing. But nothing is ever, they're talking about whatever, but they're not talking about the food. That just happens. And you notice people come up to each other and say za, which means give. Yeah. And it's just like, it just seems, my initial impression was like, how come you're not saying please and thank you? Hello? Didn't your mama teach you, and then I understood, oh my God, I say please and thank you because in my culture, that person might say no. Yeah. Right? It's the expectation that they're doing a big favor. This is a huge, nice thing for them to do. Oh my gosh, they're being so altruistic and sharing, right? And you think like, okay, which culture is the not nice culture? The one where it's expected that you're going to share, or the one where I have to beg? Basically, right? Yeah. So you're like, oh, they share, like it's just the bread and butter of their day is sharing. And so, I mean, they understand. One thing I try to make clear in the book, it isn't, because people will misread this, it isn't that they don't understand gratitude and asking, they get it, but it's just so kind of beneath them to ask. It's so interesting. And that's really important too, because they share everything. And they're together all the time. And there is no real personal space in the way that we... one time I was moving camps between camps one time, my first season there. And it was like time to move on to camps. And that's kind of you kind of feel sad because you've made really good friends. You've been there for a few weeks at this place, and now you're going to move to a different camp and whatever. But so you're just in the busy with the work of it. And I was, we each stay in our own little tents. And I was in my own little 2-person kind of pup tent there. And I had my feet out of the door and I had my head and shoulders in the door of my tent, digging through my stuff and kind of putting it into bags. And if you camp, that's not a lot of space, right? You're sort of, the door is just big enough just for you. And while I'm doing that, this guy, Isaiah, just comes busting into my tent. Shoulder to shoulder with me. And I look over at him and he looks over at me and I was like, what? I had to check myself because that's a violation, man. You don't, it's my tent. You don't come into my tent. And he just had the biggest smile on his face. I realized, oh, he's helping. He thinks, for him, he's just I guess this is what we're doing. I guess this is the job right now. And we all pitch in. And I was like, oh, hi, totally, gobsmacked by the whole thing. But that's just it. You just help and you just are around and that's what you do. It's just so, it'd bring a tear to your eye watching that happen. It's just so sweet, and it's sincere, it's really meant. And, I love it. That's one of the reasons I love being there. And I think it's really important to remember that because, hunting and gathering only works if there's the and. Yeah. Right? Yep. This is the reason that humans are the dominant species on the planet, is that we are hunting and gathering is a sort of world-beating strategy. You cannot, because you take all the advantages of being an herbivore and all the advantages of being a carnivore and you put them together. And we're the only species that does that. And, but it only works if you agree to share at the end of the day.
And when I read your book, this is one of the strategies that have allowed us, isn't it, to evolve and live as long as we have. Because I've heard people talk about the grandmother hypothesis. What's the point in keeping women around post reproductive age, in part to help gather calories and feed the
it's a big piece of it. Yeah. I mean, I would go broader. I know other anthropologists who would feel like, yes, absolutely, the grandmothers are so important, but even broader than that, all sharing is important. All the grandparents and uncles and aunts and, the cousins who don't have kids yet, everybody shares. And because of that, we live in this sort of energy rich environment that we kind of make for ourselves. It lets us have these big, expensive brains. It lets us be. It lets us have a lot of physical activity. It lets us have babies very often. So humans they have kids more often. Babies, brothers and sisters are born about maybe 2 to 4 years apart in a Hadza family. They don't use birth control really. They like big families, so they kind of have as many kids as they do. And so, but if you look at other species, that kind of level of how often do you have kids? Other primates our body size don't have kids that often because they're on their own. And so moms are at such an energy disadvantage, right? Moms have to pay for everything in terms of calories. And so it just takes a long time for moms to be able to have the next kid. Anyway, so I think this is, you get back to how I got into this. How cool is this to think about all these energy flows and how this is really the fundamental stuff that drives the engine that is our species, evolution. This is why I get so excited about it.
Oh, totally. And what an experience to be able to spend time with people like the Hadza. Yeah. Like something else from your book, which I found super interesting, which relates to their, I suppose, what they value, maybe, is what happened when the fires occurred. You talk about that time when their houses essentially burnt down and how surprised you were at their reactions.
Yeah. I mean, that was really that happens with some regularity out there. They get bushfires through in the dry period, and it was a story from a very eventful first season there. A few big things happened, or maybe they're always that big, but the first time that happens to you, you just can't believe it. We had bushfires come through. And, that you're living in a big sea of golden, dry grass that's all waist high. And so the flames are jumping, 5-6 feet off the ground. And, you're hoping that the acacia trees that are scattered around don't catch fire. And everything is dry. And it comes swinging through camp. And it was a lot to kind of get our stuff out of the way. We thought all of our stuff was going to burn. We were able to get out of that, thankfully. And the Hadza were like just having a kind of a party. And they cut some boughs from trees and were beating the fire thing down so it didn't get their houses, and everything was fine. And then about 3 hours later, the wind kind of shifted at midday, and the fire hadn't quite gone out, and it came back fast and took out a few women's houses, families' homes. And I was like, oh my God, this is a tragedy. This is it. We're done. We're going to go home, I guess. How do you carry on? Yeah, imagine if you were doing research in a community here in Chapel Hill, in the States, and people's houses burned down, you would stop doing research. You would be done, and it would be a tragedy, and that would be it. And I thought, oh my God. And the women were like, oh, what? I was like, I'm so sorry that this happened. And they're like, huh? What do you mean? Oh, the fire. Oh, whatever. Yeah. We'll just build, we'll build the next to the house tomorrow. It's fine. Pat on the back, like, that's sweet of you to not understand this at all, but thanks.
Yeah, amazing. And before I go on and just obviously talk about your research and your findings and implications for us, has your experience in their environment changed how you see the world and changed how you act? Like, how is what's that been like, Herman?
I think it's a major dose of the kind of broadening perspective that you should get from any kind of travel. I mean, the idea is it Mark Twain who said the reason to travel is to go to another country and come back and see your own new for the first time. And I butchered that quote, but I like the sentiment, right? It's a way to, when you see somebody else's culture and you live in it for a while, you just calculate all the stuff in your own, right? It gives you a fresh perspective, and it's definitely done that. I mean, not worrying so much about the calendar and the schedule, right? I mean, there's nobody's trying to make deadlines there, right? There's no Wednesdays in Hadza land, or Friday evenings, or Friday at 5 kind of stuff, or Monday mornings for that matter. So it's what they find important in their life, and we know this because Brian does a lot of work on sort of social connectivity and networks and that kind of stuff. So I'm not just telling stories. We actually have data on this. If you ask them what they find important, it's those social connections. It's being with good friends and people who they trust and family, and being able to do, the kind of live the lifestyle they like, that they have worked so hard to hold on to, right? They don't want to get the area development. So if they can live that life, if they can have those social connections, that's for them. That's it. That's what you work for. And you realize when you come back, you think, man, why am I as busy as I am doing stuff that I don't even know why I do it? I'm not even sure why I care about that committee or this deadline or whatever. And sometimes you're not the boss, and sometimes you don't get the choice. But a lot of times you do. And we give ourselves busy work, or we give ourselves stress, or we give ourselves deadlines, or we make choices that are work-based and not family-based.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes those are unavoidable, but sometimes they're not. And if they're not, you should be thinking about what's important. And I think that's helped me kind of understand that better for myself. Yeah,
that's so interesting, isn't it? Because of course, from what we understand from research, social connectivity is important regardless of where you live and your environment. Yet it seems like there's just so much more opportunity to value that when you don't have the schedules or the stuff or the other stuff which we have placed this importance on, I suppose.
Absolutely. I mean, it's I think you said it exactly right. And if you ask, it's a health issue too, right? I mean, if one of the big factors in health, heart health, mental health, all of it, is do people feel lonely? Do people feel unconnected? Do they feel unvalued? And we know these are important things. But we'd rather treat it with diet and exercise, which we should do too.
Yeah.
But I would actually like to see a focus shift away, not away. That's the wrong way to say it. But let's build another layer on this and think about connectivity as part of health. And I know people are working on that, but I think in the diet and exercise world that I kind of am in by virtue of this research I do, I wish we would keep better focus on that. I think it's really important.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. So Herman, to talk about your research, can you sort of just outline for those of us who have, or for those people who haven't read the book and don't really know, what it is you were looking at and what you found?
Yeah, so we wanted to understand total energy expenditure, all the calories burned per day in a hunting and gathering community, because we knew as an evolutionary anthropologist, this is what I love to think about and how energy flows through the body and what it's used for. But we had no measurements of energy expenditures in hunting and gathering communities. And humans, our species is a hunting and gathering species. We come from a hunting and gathering genus. So the genus Homo, right, which we're part of, Homo sapiens, have been hunting and gathering for 2.5 million years. That it is the lifestyle to which we are evolved. And so, you can't sort of understand the species without understanding its ecologically relevant context. And so that's where we went. Fine. Had no idea that we would be really kind of stepping into obesity research exactly, other than we thought, well, there's a lot of people talking about how, modern life doesn't burn enough calories. We're not active enough. And so, one thing we can do while we're doing this work is we'll be able to document what that difference is. How many more calories a day would you burn if you were a hunter-gatherer? We'll actually be able to give the world a number. And won't that be useful? So that was kind of a secondary aim, but we wanted to, we were aware that might be a helpful thing to be able to say and add. We went out and did this work in 2010, 9 and 10. Took a long time to get funding and permits. But anyway, got back. We're looking at the data. And, we were totally shocked because the Hadza men and women that we worked with had the same daily energy expenditure, the same calories per day as men and women in the US and men and women in Europe and other industrialized countries. And it was a total shocker, right? Because these men and women, the Hadza men and women, they get more physical activity, walking and digging and everything else, more activity in a day than the typical American gets in a week. Okay. So they're hugely physically active. We were sure that they would be burning tons more calories. They're not. So that was a huge shock. And that's been, that has driven my research ever since, because nothing's better in science than getting handed a really interesting puzzle.
Yeah. So what is actually going on?
Yeah. Well, let me just first say that we've done this now in other traditional populations. The Shuar population in Ecuador, who live in the sort of Amazon basin, the Chimani in very rural Bolivia. We've looked now across species. So we've been able to show that, for example, monkeys in a zoo have the same energy expenditures as monkeys in the wild. And even in laboratory settings, if you take a mouse and you make it work harder and harder for its food, its energy expenditure doesn't go up with how hard you make it work. It actually kind of stays the same from baseline. So this is the first thing we did, is make sure we weren't wrong, right?
Yeah.
And so I think this is a pretty solid observation now, that we can say that when you are more active, you don't necessarily burn more calories. There's variation in how many calories people burn anyway. So you might burn more calories because that's how randomness works, but it's not necessarily because you're more active. And the activity has a small effect on your expenditure. Okay, so what's going on? So first of all, we checked whether or not, with the Hadza study, for example, we checked whether or not they were somehow more efficient at walking. Walking is most of what they do. Maybe they've figured out a way to be more efficient at it. That's not the case. When we've measured with a mask, in a trackway in their camps that we built, the cost to walk a kilometer is the same for them as for me. Instead, what we think is going on, and this is an active area of research, we're still pinning this down, but what we think is going on is that the body is changing how it spends energy on other physiological tasks, ramping that stuff down. Because remember, we talked about your metabolism is everything, right? So there's so many systems that you can kind of pull a little bit from, and you make space for this bigger amount of energy being spent on physical activity. And so basically they're buffering, they're adjusting to their high levels of activity by spending less on other stuff, so that the net result is the total calories burned per day isn't any different than it would be if they were sedentary.
Okay. Because when you look at energy expenditure, the calculations that are used, and, when I'm teaching my students, and I'm like, basal metabolic rate is about 70% of your total energy expenditure. Then you've got your physical activity. Like, is this does your research sort of shift? Does it rewrite textbooks? Is it, as we understand it?
I guess it depends on who's writing the textbooks. It depends on who's writing the textbooks. I think people are taking this on more and more, which is nice to see. I think it should be part of what we teach, in Nutrition 101 and Metabolism 101, because it just is not the case. It just simply is not the case in study after study after study, not just my lab, by the way. So you don't have to believe me. You can look at other stuff, right? And it is not the case that if I know, for example, how much you weigh and how active you are, that I'm particularly good at predicting how many calories you burn, because how active you are doesn't really tell me much, right? And so those calorie calculators, to the extent that they work because you start off by saying, this is my BMR, right? And like you said, that's about 60 to 70% of how many calories you burn. So how wrong could you be with the rest of it?
Yeah. Good call. So how does your finding with the Hadza, how does that sort of translate into how meaningful is that for us? So, how do we use this information?
Yeah, I think it's really important to think about. First of all, it does not mean that exercise doesn't matter. Let's start with that one. The Hadza don't have heart disease. They don't have type 2 diabetes. They don't have the diseases of aging that we think of as inevitable in the West. They really don't have. And other traditional groups are the same way. And being so physically active is a big reason for that. So exercise is super important. Okay.
Can I just ask, how do they die? What's their,
it's always infections. It's, not always, but in the large percentage of mortality is from acute infection.
Okay.
Yeah. Because they can't get antibiotics, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. It's sad. You have to exercise, but we should rethink what exercise is doing for us. Exercise is not going to have as big of an effect on your metabolism as you've probably been told. It's not going to have as big of an effect on your weight as you've been told. in part because of that, because of the changes in metabolism that your body will make to adjust to it. And therefore, when we think about obesity and obesity-related disease and how to address them, I think we need to focus on diet. And that's whether we're talking about in our own lives. If we need to get control of our weight, we need to focus on diet. If we're talking at a community or population level, we still should encourage exercise, but we should not think that it's going to fix obesity. We need to fix the food if we're going to fix obesity. And, I think we need, so basically bottom line is you need to think about exercise and diet as two different tools with two different jobs. Now, some of this ends up sounding like the same old, same old. Oh, it's diet and exercise, of course.
Yeah.
But here's the difference. You can't trade one for the other, right? Because if it really is just diet and exercise as two sides of the same coin, which is the way it's often talked about, you got to get that energy deficit. You can either exercise more or eat less. No, actually, that's not how it works. You need the energy deficit, but you're only going to really get there with diet.
Yeah.
And exercise does something else.
Because it's interesting to think about. So as a nutritionist, when I'm working with clients and we're looking at that, calories in, calories out model, which is, that simplistic way with which, you might create a calorie deficit. It's that, people might be on super low calories, but their body has sort of turned down the energy required for all of these things, which means that actually, whilst they might be on low calories and might be exercising more, that deficit isn't created. Is that?
Well, you're bringing up another issue here. I mean, this is a complex system. So you're bringing up another complexity, which is if you cut the calories too sharply, right, then your body can respond by reducing its metabolic rate in response to that calorie deficit. So, if you go on a crash diet, then you're right. You have to lose weight as slowly as you gained it. I mean, I think that's, and I should say I'm not a clinician, right? So, but this is my read of the physiology and what I know from the clinical literature. And I think the other thing is too, and I would be curious to hear your thoughts on this. I think you need to do that sustainably. You need to find a diet that you're going to be able, that doesn't make you feel like it's a crash diet, that makes you feel satisfied, right? And I think there are lessons to get there from the Hadza as well. Eating whole foods, eating high fiber diets is one way to do it. People have good luck with eating higher protein diets as well, right? Yeah. But moving away from this kind of diet wars about, what's the magic nutrient or what's the evil nutrient, and instead moving toward, okay, I need to get my calories down. And if I am miserable, I'm never going to stick to it. So I need to get my calories down in a way that doesn't make me feel miserable. That sounds to me like the holy grail of nutrition.
That really does. And it does make me think I need to change my Twitter feed, because all I see is people fighting about fat and carbohydrate, which completely misses it's so reductionist, right?
Yeah.
I just find it so interesting because you've got that sort of weight loss kind of side of the coin. So, just bumping up your activity isn't necessarily going to result in weight loss when you have that, when you drop your calories too low. Does this mean, Herman, so if I think about it, if I think the opposite, would eating more therefore keep your metabolism high? So if the Hadza had more calories available, do you think that the energy expenditure would be greater?
I don't think so. So there's two pieces of that. Okay. And so so the first part of that's been done in the lab. So Mike Rosenbaum and Rudy Leibel have done great studies on this in the 90s. You overfeed somebody by 10%, and their metabolism goes up 10%.
Yeah, interesting.
Not just the digestion costs, but like all of it. Your body's sort of tracking both. It wants to match expenditure and intake. Yeah. So you're right. If you increase how much you eat, at least in the short term, your body will try to adjust. Now, if you sit down and eat an entire cheesecake, that's probably beyond what your body can do. But in general, within limits, Now, would the Hadza have higher expenditures if they had more food? I don't think that they are food limited, actually.
Okay.
They don't spend, they spend a fair amount of their day out foraging, but they also spend a fair amount of their day hanging out at camp. I mean, if they were really starving, or if they were really, they could forage more, and there's more food to get. They aren't in a sort of barren landscape, right? So they're actually, they can get as much food as they feel that they need. And so I don't think that they're wishing, either consciously or subconsciously, that they had more food all the time. So I don't think that would change anything, but I don't know.
Yeah, interesting. So a lot of, I guess, things that I think about and things that I work with people is people who are on like seemingly very low calories, and they're not. It's not that they're misreporting. I mean, they might they're estimating a lot, but they're not by hundreds and hundreds. Yet they are also working out, or they're athletes and they're training for a marathon, half marathon, Ironman, that kind of thing. And so, and they're unable to lose weight, and that's one of their major sort of considerations. So in this context, I try to encourage them to gradually increase their calorie, put their disbelief aside and gradually increase their calories, because with the hope that actually what's going on is that calorie deficit that's been that they think has been created isn't there, because their metabolism has sort of just shifted. And so we're trying to encourage that to increase. Which sort of speaks to those studies that you were just talking about, that sort of 10% sort of, you sort of do it slowly.
Yeah. That's interesting to hear. I would just say, I think there's been so much misinformation that people don't believe in calories or something like that, which is sort of like not believing in kilograms. Like, I don't know what that means. But, the bathroom scale is the best tool any of us have to know if the energy that's coming in is matching the energy going out.
Yeah.
And there's a whole lot of mysticism and charlatanism out there that would tell you that it's more complicated than that, but it honestly isn't. Yeah. And so if you can just believe it, it's almost like when you're lost. I don't know if you've had this experience hiking or whatever. I've had it. You lose your way and you're looking at the map and you're trying to make the map fit what you're looking at, because you're sure you're here. And so you're trying, is that the mountain over there? And is this the trail? And it kind of turns, it kind of turns to the right, but you're not really looking at the right part of the map, but you can't imagine where else you are. So you're sure. And you bend the map, right? We call this bending the map to fit what you want to be true, which is that you're here. Yeah. And you say, well, this map must be wrong. And it's not wrong. You're wrong. You're wrong about where you are. And the map is right. And so it's the same with the scale, right? Like, we don't want the scale to go up or down or whatever it is. And we want to believe, so we tell an elaborate story about calories and it's fiction. And sorry, no, it's the map. That's your map, right? And you want to do it in a healthy way, in a careful way. And there's also sort of culture and psychology wrapped up in it too. I don't want to downplay that, but it is, you really do have to trust the data if you want to use a kind of evidence-based approach, I think.
Yeah, nice. So can you kind of talk about the Tour de France riders then, and the amount of energy? Yeah. So what's going on there, like with regards to the energy that they consume and burn and
so this energy constraint that your body seems to be doing, I talk about in the book. Your body's trying to keep your energy expended day to day within a kind of in a narrow range, and you'll change day to day, of course, if you're more or less active, but it's trying to keep that average in a narrow range. You can do something like the Tour de France, and obviously your body is, that's way out of that range, right? You can push it you can do an ultra marathon, or you can do a Tour de France ride, or you can, there's all sorts of great examples of pushing the body to those limits. And so that's a real challenge to this constrained energy idea. And so we looked at this and said, well, okay, how far can you push beyond that ceiling, and how long can you push for it? And it's really kind of cool. So you can push way above that ceiling if you only have to do it for a day. You can push a fair amount if you're going to do it for a month. You can push just a little bit above it if you're going to do it for a few months, right? And so the longer you go, the more you're constrained to getting fit back underneath that metabolic ceiling. And the very, very long-term limit on what the body's capable of maintaining seems to be about 2.5 times your basal metabolic rate. And the reason we use that as a marker is big people have big machinery for taking in energy, big stomachs and livers. Small people have small machinery. So you're kind of trying to size it to the machinery that you're carrying around to get that energy back in. We think at above 2.5 times your basal metabolic rate, you don't have big enough machinery to pull the energy in and replenish what you burned that day. And so the very, very long-term limit on expenditure would be that. Most people live well below that, by the way. And the constraint seems to keep us, day-to-day life in the Hadza, for example, is about 1.8, 1.7, 1.8 times your basal metabolic rate. That's where a lot of us live. So it's well below that 2.5. But anyway, that's what we think is going on. We'll see if anybody can, break through that metabolic ceiling that we plotted out when we were doing the work. So we'll see.
Yeah. And of course, there's the Westerterp study looking at marathoners and half marathoners, and you mentioned that in the book with regards to the amount of energy that these people have burnt. Do you want to just sort of talk us through that?
So there's the study. I want to make sure I got the right one. So there's one where people ran. Sorry, right. The Westerterp, the half marathon training study. Yes, this is a great example of your body adjusting. So men and women were trained to run a half marathon, and so over the course of a year, they were totally sedentary, didn't exercise at all at the beginning, and they slowly ramped up their exercise program because you can't start all at once so that they could get to where they could run a half marathon, 13 miles. And they measured energy expenditure at baseline before they exercised, and then every couple months they checked in on them. And what's cool is that in both the men and women, in the first time they checked in on them after they were exercising, a couple months in, their total daily energy expenditures went up. Great. That's exactly what you'd predict. That's what your textbook probably says should happen. They were more active. They went up. But now we know, okay, if it went up, whatever it was, 10% based on their exercise regime. Well, when we double their exercise, now we should go up 20%. And when we triple their exercise, we should go up 30%. We now have what we should know will happen as they get more and more active. And that doesn't happen at all. In fact, what happens, the women, their total energy expenditures came back down a little bit towards baseline. So at the end of the study, at the end of a year of training, they were burning a little bit more energy than they were at baseline, but not much, and not as much as you'd expect from all the exercise they were doing. Not anywhere near that. Same with the men. And so it's just a great example of the body adjusting over time to your exercise load, right? It doesn't adjust right away. So at first, that first month check-in, they saw the higher expenditures. But then as the body adapted, it didn't keep on increasing. It actually came down a bit in the women. There are other studies like this too. There's a great study called the Midwest study. They had a 16-month exercise program. At the beginning versus the end, they measured energy expenditures. So at baseline, before you do any exercise, versus month 16, when you've been exercising with supervision, so you're not cheating, for 16 months, energy expenditures didn't change. Crazy, right?
Yeah.
But absolutely true. And so it's, and there's other examples of that. So, you start exercising tomorrow, you'll see some weight change right away before your body adjusts. You should do it anyway. You'll feel great. Yes. But those weight changes might not be durable. And the energy expenditure, the metabolism changes won't be durable. And you're going to come back down towards baseline, maybe all the way back to baseline, maybe somewhere toward baseline before you're done, in a few months, because that's your body's going to adjust.
Yeah. And I guess, if I'm thinking about it correctly, it's like if I'm looking at my Garmin watch when I'm going out for a run, and it tells me that I've burnt this many calories in that run because this is my weight and this is the intensity that I've run at and all of the other factors that might calculate that. As I understand it, that's inaccurate anyway, but actually that's the less important part of the puzzle, because it's the background stuff that's being sort of drawn from, isn't it? So that doesn't necessarily change there, but it's just what's going on in the background.
That's right. You probably did burn something like what it told you for the run, but it's everything else that's, so the run calories is fine. That is, I don't know, maybe it's okay. But if it tries to tell you how many calories you burn for the day,
that's where the miscalculation happens. Yeah, interesting. I've heard you talk actually that some of these, like the energy conservation model, is in the other processes are down-regulated, and we've talked about hormones and the rest of it. But you've talked about this conservation as being a good thing.
Oh yeah,
Herman. Yeah. So can you describe why it might be a good thing to have this drop in the energy?
Absolutely. This is an active area of research. We're still sort of chasing down all the little cellular switches and knobs on this one. But we know that when we look at people who exercise versus those who don't, people who exercise have lower levels of inflammation. They have lower stress levels. Their cortisol levels and their epinephrine levels, adrenaline levels in response to stress are lower. Their reproductive hormones, estrogen for women and testosterone for men, are in a healthier place, a slightly lower level than they are among people who are totally sedentary. And exercise seems to be protective against reproductive cancers. And so those are adjustments we think that I've suggested, I've argued. Those adjustments are your body ramping down unnecessary immune activity. That's inflammation, ramping down stress reaction, ramping down, reproductive hormones a bit. I don't want to scare people off. We're not talking about infertility issues or anything like that, but just put it in a healthier range, so that you have room basically for the physical activity. And that seems to be what's going on. We have all kinds of fun evidence for that, but we're in the middle right now of trying to chase that down experimentally and show exactly how all those cellular changes happen.
And, you are an evolutionary anthropologist and not necessarily an exercise physiologist or someone who is in the traditional field, if you like, of exercise science and whatnot. How has your research been received over the years?
It's been a mix. A lot of people, I would say the majority of people, at least who have reached out, have been really supportive and said, "Oh, thanks for a lot. This helps me understand what's going on with myself."
Yeah,
I've had doctors, in the and other healthcare people in the obesity field say, "Thank you. This helps me helps me with my patients and help them understand the role of exercise and diet and how this all fits together." Yeah. So that's been really rewarding because, again, I'm an anthropologist. I never expected to be in any kind of clinically relevant work, but people of course have pushed back. I think people haven't always understood what I was trying to say, right? Which is on me. They say, "Well, are you telling me that if I run a marathon today, I'm not going to burn more energy today than if I rest tomorrow?" And, no, I'm not saying that. Of course, you're going to have big days and small days. And people say, "Well, you're saying that exercise doesn't matter." And that's the furthest thing away from what we're trying to say. Yeah. And so I think there's been pushback based, and other people just don't believe it either because, whatever they don't, for whatever reason, they will not believe it. And okay, that's up to them too. But overall, it's been pretty positive, I think, and it's been fun. This is what science is, right? It's a marketplace of ideas and data. And if you don't have the data, don't show up. And if you got the data, you come and you say, "Look, guys, the worst thing you can do is have a surprising result and go, that sounds strange. So let's not talk about it. Let's do something else."
Yeah.
Right? What you have to do when you find these data that surprise yourself and surprise other people is say, "Well, look, these are the data, and let's talk about what you think there might be issues, or I might, let's talk about it, but let's not pretend it's not there." That's the only way you get further along is by wrestling with this stuff. So that's been really fun.
Yeah, nice. And from a public health perspective, I really like how you've sort of suggested that some of the messaging in public health in and around obesity and the importance of diet and exercise, like things need to shift there as well because of the same importance is placed on both diet and exercise. Whereas, of course, your research would suggest that shouldn't be that shouldn't be the case, right?
Yeah. And, so there are sort of two ways to look at this, right? A glass half full, glass half empty kind of thing. The glass half full way of looking at this would say, like, well, look, you're still saying that diet and exercise are both important, so the public messaging that we have out there is fine. The other way to look at this is to say, but let's actually ask how these things are being marketed and what the promises being made are. When you look at a obesity fact sheet that the CDC or the WHO puts out, and it says that this is the way you're going to lose weight is by exercise and diet, and you can pick, basically the implication is you can pick one. Yeah. And people don't want to change their diet, so they pick exercise or whatever. They get told that exercise is the way to do it, and they beat their heads against the wall of exercise, and nothing happens, and they think I've failed or I've been lied to. Right? I think that's completely unhelpful, and I think it's actually damaging to the public health effort to get that right. Yeah. I think there's also a more sinister or cynical, I think, way to think about this, which is, here we are. American football season is about to start here, the NFL. I don't know if it ever makes it over the Pacific to you guys.
Oh, yeah.
But so what's going to happen is they're going to have advertisements, they used to anyway in previous seasons, for something called NFL Play 60. And it was this idea, you're going to get kids out. Let's get kids out exercising, during school days and after school and play 60 minutes a day. That's the idea. NFL Play 60. It's a great idea. Kids should exercise. Absolutely. Guess who would love you to focus on that shiny object rather than diet? The people who are sponsoring it, like Gatorade and Coca-Cola and the rest of them, right? So, the answer is go and exercise all you want, but then drink the Gatorade. Yeah. And why? Well, because you have to have proper nutrition for all that exercise, don't you know? Yeah. And so it becomes this really kind of messed up thing where we're not going to fix kids' obesity issues at all this way. This is actually maybe at best neutral and maybe even harmful. Because, so that's where I get really uncomfortable with the sort of, oh, well, we're just still talking about diet and exercise. What's the difference? No, I think that the differences matter. And I think the way we talk about it matters.
Yeah, I completely agree. And particularly how you've got, food industry isn't going anywhere, But it is made so much more worse when Coca-Cola appear to be helping with this energy, get your energy into balance by exercising message, and we can be part of that. Like, that's a whole other topic, really. Herman, how has your research changed your own behavior, if it has, or your own habits?
I think it's made me more aware of my diet. It's made me more aware of making time to go exercise. We're all busy, and as we all kind of get into that middle stage of your life when I've got kids, I've got a job, and it would be very easy. And I just spent the last 3 days on Zoom for committee meetings that I could not get out of. And that's, so it does happen that you just can't exercise every day. I get it.
Yeah.
But I make it more of a priority now than I think I used to. And it's partly because I know how important it is. Looking at the literature, looking at the data, looking at my own data. And then when it comes to food, I'm convinced by work by people like Kevin Hall, for example, that, it's not carbs that are bad or fat, whatever. It's not, there's no evil nutrients. We package these foods in weird ultra processed forms that trick our brains into overeating. Yeah. And so we need to be really wary about how much ultra processed food we let in our homes, that we have on our shelves in our pantries, and that we eat. And so that's maybe more of aware of that as well, I think.
Herman, thank you so much for your time and for your book. It's such a fabulous read, and I certainly recommend that people go out and buy it or download it the way that I did. Where can people find you?
Yeah, well, thank you for that. I do hope they'll check out Burn, and that's a good way to kind of get cut up to date on the work we've been doing. They can find me online at Duke, my lab, and what we're up to. I'm on Twitter at Herman Pontzer. And I want to say if people are excited about the Hadza and interested to learn more there, or how they can even help, we've set up a charity to kind of help that community stay vital and strong, and it's called the Hadza Fund, HADZAFUND.org. You can check out all things Hadza there.
That is awesome, and I will put those links in the show notes. Herman, have a fabulous rest of your day.
You as well. Thanks so much. Bye.
All right, team, I hope you enjoyed that. I gotta say, I really enjoyed talking to Herman, and his book is so good. He's such a good writer that it was a very entertaining and not at all dry. And it's just so good to see how our understanding on this has changed. And it really does explain a lot of why we might not burn the calories we think we do, or improve the body composition you think you might, just by training for a longer endurance event. Next week on the podcast, because it has been a year of Mikkipedia, I thought that I would love to sit down and chat to my mate Bevan McKinnon, who is an elite triathlon coach, and he is the host of Fitter Radio, which I am the co-host of and have been for the last 7 years. And I really credit Bev into getting me into this podcast space. We both love to talk, and the opportunity that he provided me by suggesting I come on and be his co-host really laid the platform, if you like, for sort of where I am today, which I am forever grateful. More than that, though, he's a great mate. We have an awesome conversation about his own background and experience growing up, how we got into triathlon, how that evolved into coaching, and with the evolution of the podcast, where he is today. Bev is a great talker. We have a great conversation, and I think that you'll enjoy what we have to chat about. Until then, though, catch me over on Facebook at Mikki Williden Nutrition, on Instagram and Twitter at Mikki Williden, or over on my website, mikkiwilliden.com, where in addition to that recipe access portal, you can book a consult, sign up to one of my evergreen programs, such as the Fat Loss Plan for Men and or Women, Keto Longevity Plan, or my Real Food Nutrition Plan for your general person, but also your athlete as well, where you get shopping lists, meal plans, access to me with the Real Food Facebook group, and a host of other benefits. All right, team, have a fab week. See you later.